A 5-year-old girl who was subjected to intensive workouts as a form of punishment dies.
To put a 5-year-old young woman or young 5-year-old child through an extraneous exercise routine as if she's going into the NFL at 5 years old is completely unreasonable. It's completely inappropriate, and it's completely inexcusable.
Years later, her mother's boyfriend is sent to prison for the shocking murder. In April of 2019, 5-year-old Lareah Davis was rushed to a Las Vegas hospital after she was found unresponsive. When doctors initially examined her, they noticed the little girl had several bruises on her legs, her torso, and her abdomen. The investigation would seemingly lead authorities to questioning Lareah's mother's boyfriend, who reportedly called 911. According to court documents, Cierre Wood claimed the 5-year-old hit her head after she fell backwards. But a deeper dive into the investigation would reveal more heartbreaking details. According to the arrest report, Wood subjected the young girl to intense exercises and workouts at home as a form of punishment because Wood believed Lareah was overweight. Police say Wood put the 5-year-old girl through various workouts like running sprints in the apartment, sit-ups, and wall squats. Wood reportedly told police he was trying to get Lareah on the right path due to her being chunky. On the day she died, Wood made the young girl do sit-ups after she didn't learn her letters and numbers. While doing the sit-ups, Lareah fell backwards and hit her head. When authorities responded to Wood's 911 call, police say they found her body cold and stiff, and an autopsy would reveal more devastating details. According to officials, Lareah was taken to the hospital with at least 100 bruises, including 20 broken ribs, and those injuries were reportedly new at the time of her death. Lareah suffered through more injuries from the abuse. She had multiple skull contusions, internal bleeding, bruises to her heart, diaphragm, and connective tissue. Authorities would arrest the then 28-year-old Cierre Wood for Lareah's murder. But he wasn't the only one arrested for the horrific crime. Lareah's mother, who was Woods' girlfriend at the time, was also charged in the case. Initially, she was charged with child abuse and neglect. Police said Taylor contributed to the abuse of her daughter, saying she sat on Lareah's chest and stomach as a form of punishment. According to a 2019 report from KSNV, Lareah's family members told the outlet the 5-year-old split time between her father's home in California and time with her mother in Nevada. Lareah's death came just weeks after she and her mother moved into Woods' home. But according to Lareah's father, there were warning signs the 5-year-old was scared to be at home in Nevada. He told the outlet in 2019 that every time he picked her up during those last few months of her life, she was afraid to go home. Really quickly, I'm going to guess a lot of you who watch our stories might be business owners, maybe even thinking of starting a little side business. That's why I want to talk to you about our amazing sponsor, Odoo. Odoo is a free all-in-one business management software that provides you with a range of applications that helps with the day-to-day of owning a business. Believe it or not, there are even a few moving parts here at Law&Crime. For example, our HR manager can use Odoo to manage PTO and new hires info. Our sales guy can use Odoo's CRM platform. I can even use it to manage our various subscriptions. But here's the key. You can try Odoo for free right now without entering your credit card. You can even get free lifetime access to one of the apps in the Odoo suite if you don't need the rest. So click our link odoo.com/LCnews in the description and pin comments and try Odoo now for free. In June of 2019, 2 months after Lareah's death, both Wood and Taylor were indicted on murder and felony child abuse charges. Fast forward 5 years after Lareah's horrific death, both would strike a plea deal. In April of this year, Wood, who is now 33 years old, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and a charge of child abuse, neglect, or endangerment. But Wood didn't plead guilty to the crime. Instead, he entered an Alford plea. As for Lareah's mother, Amy Taylor, she entered a guilty plea in April, admitting to charges of second-degree murder and child abuse, neglect, or endangerment, resulting in substantial bodily harm. According to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, during sentencing, Wood's attorney argued his client didn't inflict the injuries that led to Lareah's death, turning the blame to Taylor. He blamed Taylor for sitting on the 5-year-old girl's chest and holding her down. Wood claimed to be at work at the time, saying he didn't know Taylor had done that. His attorney argued he tried to provide Lareah and her mother with stability and had no prior criminal record. But Taylor turned the blame on Wood during her sentencing, claiming he was abusive toward her and Lareah. Wood claimed Taylor was the abuser and he did nothing to protect the 5-year-old girl. District Judge Jacqueline Bluth reportedly said it was hard to grasp that Wood did nothing when his family stressed his strong personality and willingness to fight for what he stands for in letters. She said, quote, "It's very hard for me to believe that you just passively stood there while this child was basically being beaten to death." Then the judge read text messages between Taylor and Wood referring to young Larea with profanity and discussing not wanting to send the 5-year-old to school with bruises. And his statement to the court, Wood reportedly said he took responsibility, saying his messages were unacceptable, but that he didn't mean what he said literally. But the judge fired back, saying in part, Wood should thank his attorney that he got off because if a jury heard the text messages and saw the photos she had to see, he'd be doing life in prison without the possibility of parole. We have a lot to discuss, and joining me to break this case down further is criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson. Now, Safa, thank you so much for being here. Now, a Las Vegas judge sentenced Cierre Wood to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years with a consecutive sentence of 28 to 72 months for the child abuse or neglect charge. What are your thoughts on that sentence? And given the extensive injuries young Larea suffered through, are you surprised that he wasn't just given life in prison?
I think that this sentence definitely reflects the seriousness of the offense. He is sentenced to life in prison. Of course, there's a possibility for him to receive parole after 10 years, but it doesn't mean that he's going to be paroled. Not only that, but he pled guilty to the felony child abuse charge, which carries a sentence range of 28 months to 6 years. Notably, these charges or these sentences are going to be run consecutively. So he's not doing the time altogether for both charges. He's doing those sentences back to back. So that essentially extends his stay in the Department of Corrections of Nevada because of the nature of the plea. So while I do think that certainly, we of course would like to see him in prison for life, essentially. I think a plea like this brings about justice. He's got a life sentence. Not only that, you don't want to relive through this situation, put witnesses on the stand that are going to have to, talk about the nature of this child's injuries. A jury is not going to want to sit through that. It's highly sensitive, highly emotional. So I think this was a good outcome for as good as it could be.
And are you surprised that Wood entered an Alford plea? And why do you think that he chose to go that route as opposed to pleading guilty?
It doesn't surprise me. My inclination is that he entered into the Alford plea as a part of the plea agreement to possibly receive some sort of benefit. I know that in the state of Nevada, there's a couple of sentencing options with regard to the murder in the second degree charge. One, I believe, is just a flat out life sentence. One is the sentence of life with the possibility of parole after 10 years. So, without knowing too much about the case, I would think that that possibility of parole is what he was looking for, which would explain why he would enter into that plea. So, again, probably part of the plea negotiation for that case.
And Larea's mother, Amy Taylor, was also sentenced in this case, but she pleaded guilty, her sentence being life in prison as well, with the possibility of parole too after 10 years for the murder charge, plus 8 to 20 years on the abuse charge, given she played a part in the abuse by sitting on her own daughter's chest and holding her down. What do you make of that sentence?
I don't think that's a long enough sentence. At the end of the day, she's the parent. She's supposed to be there to protect her daughter by any means necessary from anyone. And for her to participate in the murder of her child is just utterly ridiculous. And I think that a sentence like that, I mean, you can't do justice for a child that's lost their life at the hands of their parent.
And Larea's injuries, they were extensive and they were heartbreaking. Especially thinking about her final moment, she had broken ribs, over 100 bruises, a lacerated liver, contusions. And during sentencing, the judge read off texts between Taylor and Wood referring to young Larea with profanity and talking about not wanting her to go to school. So that way officials may see those bruises. Given that, are you surprised prosecutors even went for a plea deal in their cases?
You know, although, they may have had a strong case, it still doesn't surprise me, for the sake of judicial economy, which is not putting these cases through to trial when there's enough evidence to convict an individual and they're willing to accept responsibility. For example, by way of that Alford plea, I can understand why ultimately this case resulted, or these prosecutors ultimately decided to allow that plea agreement or to extend that plea agreement. So it isn't surprising. It sounds like they had a pretty slam dunk case from the things that we know. However, no case is completely winnable. So, in the sense of judicial economy and ensuring that nobody has to relive this case in these situations, I think they did the best thing that they could do.
And not only was Larea's injuries heartbreaking to hear, but it was also heartbreaking to hear Larea's father's victim impact statement because we don't know the extent of the custody arrangement that he had between him and Amy Taylor, especially at the time around her death. But Larea's father saying that the last time they spoke, she, being Larea, said that Wood told her he'd beat her if she said anything. Now, this is just a 5-year-old girl with the threat and the punishment of this severe beating and the severe abuse, and then 2 days later she was dead. What are your thoughts on just kind of what Larea's father had to go through, thinking that his daughter might have been in a way safe with their mother or with her mother, but what are your thoughts on kind of what he's going through as well too?
I can only imagine that he is completely heartbroken by this situation. And, that reflects in his victim impact statement that he read in court, or I believe was provided to the court on his behalf. To trust that your child is going to be safe with somebody, particularly their mother, who absolutely owes an undevout duty to protect that child. And for that to be violated by that parent is just utterly egregious, and it's totally heartbreaking. And he's going to have to live with this for the rest of his life, unfortunately.
And kind of what stood out to me in this case as well is that this kind of paralleled another case that we've covered here at Law and Crime, and that's the Christopher Greger case out of Jersey. And both of those parallels being that the defendants in these cases were abusing these young children by over-exercising them, putting them through extensive workouts. Now, Cierre Wood was a former football player. He was in the NFL. He went to the Canadian League as well, too. But putting a 5-year-old girl through intensive sit-ups, making her do sprints, all because he believed that she was overweight. Again, this being a 5-year-old girl. What are your thoughts on just this claim that he just believed that she was quote unquote too chunky? What are your thoughts?
It's inexcusable and it's unacceptable. At the end of the day, in the society that we live in, we'd hope that people would operate with reasonableness, like what a reasonable and prudent person would do, as we call it in the law. And to put a 5-year-old young woman or young 5-year-old child through an extraneous exercise routine as if she's going into the NFL at 5 years old is completely unreasonable. It's completely inappropriate, and it's completely inexcusable. And I understand that Mr. Woods played in the NFL, and there may be some other mental health implications that he may be facing to even allow him to even think that that was okay. But again, that's inexcusable. It's not acceptable. I can't fathom why anybody would think that that would be okay.
And in 2034, do you believe that a parole board will possibly let out Cierre Wood or even Amy Taylor?
I don't think so. I mean, it would certainly surprise me if they did. Oftentimes, with homicide cases, and especially something of this nature where a child is a victim, parole boards are going to think twice as to whether or not they're going to let an individual go about freely. I certainly don't think that mom would be coming out in 10 years, and I don't think Mr. Woods would be either. Not only that, but when the parole board is going to sit and take a look at this case, they're going to reach out to dad and attorneys and other individuals that are going to give their opinion as to whether or not they should be released. Also, what the parole board is going to be looking for is that acceptance of responsibility. Now, we know that Mr. Woods took an Alford plea in this case, which essentially says, I remain not guilty. I still claim my innocence, but I admit that you have enough evidence to find me guilty if we were to go to trial. So he hasn't just outright pled guilty and accepted the sentence, and he hasn't outright pled guilty and admitted to the actions. He's just agreeing with the prosecution that they do have enough evidence. So when a parole board goes to revisit this case, they're going to be taking a look at, is he going to fully accept responsibility? And after 10 years, I don't know that he would.
All right, Safa, I really appreciate your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, do you have any final thoughts just about this really horrific and devastating story?
It's horrific, it's egregious, and it's unacceptable. And I think that, as individuals and caregivers of children, we really need to think twice about how we're treating children and what we're doing with them. And hopefully we can have a turnaround in this area, because there's way too many child homicides going on right now.
All right, Safa, again, thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's unclear where Amy Taylor and Cierre Wood will serve out their respective sentences. In addition to Wood's prison sentence, the judge ordered he pay for funeral expenses as well. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.